The stars had lost their beauty 300 years ago, or once they sparkled with hope and wonder, now they brought only fear. Every captain who sailed between the worlds knew the stories. Every mother who looked up at the night sky whispered prayers that the dark ships would never come. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his colony ship, watching the emergency signal flash red on his screen. The message came from Haven's Rest, a small farming world on the edge of known space. The words were broken and filled with static, but he could hear the terror in the voice. "This is Haven's Rest, calling any ship. We are under attack." "Repeat, we are under attack. The Kreth are here." "God help us, the Kreth are here." Jake's hands tightened on the control panel. Every person in the galaxy knew that name. The Kreth Dominion had been the nightmare of civilized space for centuries. They were 8 feet tall, covered in thick scales, with claws that could tear through metal. Their ships were black as the void, and when they came to a world, nothing good ever followed. "Captain, should we change course?" asked his first officer, Lieutenant Ben Carter.
Ow.
The young man's voice shook slightly. Nobody wanted to face the Kreth, not even trained soldiers. Jake looked at his crew. These were good people, civilians mostly, running supplies between the human colonies. They had families waiting for them at home, but somewhere on Haven's Rest, people were dying. "Set course for Haven's Rest," Jake said. "Maximum speed." Journey took 2 days. During that time, the distress signals stopped coming. The silence was worse than the screams had been. When they finally reached the planet, Jake felt his heart sink. Smoke rose from what had once been cities. The orbital stations were nothing but floating debris. Dr. Lisa Carter, the ship's doctor and scientist, joined Jake on the bridge. She was Ben's sister, and like her brother, she had never seen the aftermath of a Kreth attack. Her face went pale as she looked at the devastation below. "Are there any survivors?" she asked. "We're detecting some life signs in the underground areas," Ben reported. "Not many, but some people made it to the shelters. They landed near what had been the main settlement. The buildings were reduced to rubble and ash. Bodies lay scattered in the streets, and the air smelled of smoke and death." Jake had fought in the border wars, but this was different. This wasn't a battle. This was slaughter. They found the survivors in a network of caves beneath the town. 43 people had escaped the attack, mostly women, children, and elderly. They huddled in the darkness, afraid to come out even when Jake's team identified themselves as human. An old farmer named Pete Williams was the first to emerge. His clothes were torn and his face was covered in dirt, but his eyes held a terrible knowledge that Jake recognized. Pete had seen things that would haunt him forever. "How many?" Jake asked softly. 15,000, Pete whispered. 15,000 people lived here. We're all that's left. Dr. Carter moved among the survivors, treating their wounds and checking for injuries. But Jake could see that the worst damage wasn't physical. These people had been broken in ways that medicine couldn't heal. A woman named Susan Davis sat holding her infant daughter. Her husband had been killed defending the evacuation center. She rocked back and forth, singing a lullaby to keep herself calm. "They didn't just kill people," she told Jake. "They made sure we watched. They wanted us to be afraid. They separated. The families first, made the children watch their parents die, made the parents watch their children suffer." An elderly teacher named Mrs. Helen Brooks had been in charge of the school when the attack began. She had managed to get some of the children to safety, but not all. "They targeted the schools first," she said, her voice hollow. "Not the military base, not the government building. The schools. They knew exactly what they were doing." Jake learned that this was the Kreth way. They had perfected the art of terror over 3 centuries. They didn't just conquer worlds, they destroyed hope, made sure that any survivors would spread stories of fear to other planets. The Kreth never kept prisoners for long. They took the strongest to work in their slave camps until they died. The rest were killed as examples. They filmed their executions and broadcast them to neighboring systems. The message was always the same: surrender or face the same. Dr. Carter studied the attack patterns while Jake organized the evacuation. The Kreth had used precision strikes to take out communications first, then transportation. They had landed troops at specific points to cut off escape routes. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated terror. They've done this thousands of times, she told Jake. They know exactly how to break a population's will to fight. As they loaded the survivors onto the ship, Jake contacted the other human colonies. The response was always the same: fear. The colonial governments offered sympathy and prayers, but no action. Earth's military was spread too thin across dozens of worlds. The Kreth seemed unstoppable. The other alien species were even worse. The Zilani traders refused to even discuss the Kreth. The Thoric miners had stopped mining in systems. Where Kreth ships had been spotted, an entire galaxy had learned to live in fear. During the journey back to New Terra Colony, Jake found himself thinking about his own children. Bobby was 12. Sarah was 8. They lived in safety on New Terra, protected by distance and luck. But for how long? The Kreth were expanding constantly, adding new worlds to their empire every year. Dr. Carter joined him in his quarters on the last night of the journey. She had been studying the survivor interviews and medical records. "Jake, we need to understand something," she said. "The Kreth aren't just conquerors, they're farmers." "What do you mean?" "They're farming fear. Every attack is designed to create maximum terror with minimum effort. They attack one world, and 10 others surrender without a fight. It's efficient, it's brilliant, and it's working." Jake looked out at the stars through his cabin window. Somewhere out there, the black ships of the Kreth Dominion were moving between worlds, spreading their shadow across the galaxy. And everyone, humans and aliens alike, was too afraid to stand up to them. "How do you fight an enemy that feeds on fear?" he asked. Dr. Carter was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she finally said, "but we better figure it out soon." The next morning, they arrived at New Terra Colony. The survivors were taken to refugee centers, where they would try to rebuild their lives. But Jake knew they would never truly recover. The Kreth had made sure of that. As he filed his report with Colonial Command, Jake included a warning that he knew would be ignored. The Kreth were getting bolder. Their attacks were becoming more frequent. Sooner or later, they would come for the core human worlds. The galaxy had lived in darkness for 300 years, and Jake Morrison was beginning to fear that the light would never return. 3 months had passed since the massacre at Haven's Rest. The survivors had been relocated to safer colonies. But their stories spread like wildfire through human space. Every settlement now lived with the knowledge that they could be next. On the agricultural world of Millfield Colony, life continued as normal as possible. The wheat fields stretched for miles under the bright yellow sun, and the colonists worked hard to maintain their peaceful way of life. They had been lucky so far. Millfield was far from the main shipping routes, hidden among a cluster of unremarkable stars. Danny Parker was 8 years old and had never known fear. He lived with his parents, Alex and Maria, on a farm at the edge of the main settlement. Every morning, he helped his father check the crops and feed the gentle, 6-legged creatures they called hoppers. The animals were native to Millfield and had become beloved pets and work animals for the colonists. Danny's favorite place was the old oak tree his grandfather had planted when the colony was first established. The tree had grown huge over 50 years, and Danny had built a small fort in its branches. From there, he could see the entire valley where the farm spread out like a green carpet. His mother, Maria, taught at the colony school. She would often find Danny reading under his tree, lost in stories about knights and dragons from old Earth. His father, Alex, joked that the boy would rather read about adventures than have them. "Danny's going to be a scholar," Alex would tell. "His wife, he's got more books than toys." The boy's best friend was a girl named Lucy Chen, who lived on the neighboring farm. They would spend hours exploring the fields and catching fireflies in the evening. Lucy was brave and bold, always. The first to climb the highest hill or cross the deepest stream. Danny was more careful, but he would follow her anywhere. On the morning the Kreth came, Danny was helping his father repair a fence when the emergency sirens began to wail. Alex dropped his tools and grabbed his son's hand. "Run to the house," he said. "Get your mother. We need to reach the shelters. The colony had prepared for this day. Every settlement in human space now had underground bunkers and evacuation plans. But as Danny ran toward their farmhouse, he could see black shapes falling from the sky like deadly rain. Colony Administrator Ben Richards' voice crackled over the emergency broadcast system. This is not a drill. Kreth forces have entered the system. All civilians report to designated emergency shelters immediately. Defense forces prepare for ground assault. The settlement's small security force consisted of 20 volunteers with basic training and hunting rifles. They had no illusions about stopping a Kreth invasion. They would try to buy time for the evacuation. Danny reached the house as his mother was throwing supplies into a bag. Maria Parker was a strong woman who had helped establish the colony's school system, but her hands shook as she packed medicine and food. "Where's your father?" she asked. "Coming," Danny said, but when they looked out the window, they could see Alex helping elderly neighbors toward the shelter entrance. The Kreth dropships were landing in the fields, crushing the wheat that had been ready for harvest. "We have to go now," Maria said. She grabbed Danny's hand, and they ran toward the community center, where the main shelter entrance was hidden, but they were too late. Kreth's soldiers had already reached the settlement. Danny had never seen them before, and the reality was worse than any description. They moved like predators, their scaled skin gleaming in the sunlight. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Maria pulled Danny behind a storage building as Kreth troops herded colonists into the town square. Danny could see his friends and neighbors being forced to their knees. Mrs. Brown from the bakery was crying. Mr. Johnson, who ran the supply depot, was trying to comfort his wife. "Stay here," Maria whispered. "Don't make any noise. It ain't going to find another way to the shelter." She kissed his forehead and slipped away around the corner of the building. Danny pressed himself against the wall, clutching his favorite book about brave knights who saved people from monsters. But these monsters were real, and there were no knights coming to save anyone. Minutes passed like hours. Danny could hear shouting and the sound of energy weapons firing. Through a crack in the storage building wall, he watched the Kreth commander address the captured colonists. The alien was even larger than the others. With scars across his scaled face and medals on his armor, General Thaxis spoke in perfect human language, his voice carrying easily across the square. "I am General Thaxis of the Kreth Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. You will be relocated to work camps where you will serve the Empire until you die. Those who resist will be executed as examples." An old farmer named Carl Williams stepped forward. "Please. We're just farmers. We have children here. We don't want any trouble." Taxis looked at the old man with cold reptilian eyes. "Trouble has found you regardless." The general's claws flashed, and Carl fell to the ground. Several colonists screamed. Children began to cry. Danny bit his hand to keep from making any sound. "Now you understand," Thaxis said. "Fear is wisdom. Resistance is death." Danny tried to stay hidden, but a piece of loose metal fell from the building and clattered to the ground. A Kreth patrol heard the noise and came to investigate. Danny ran, but the soldiers were faster. They dragged him kicking and screaming into the town square. Maria saw her son and tried to reach him, but Kreth's soldiers held her back.
Alex
Fought to break free from the group of male prisoners, but he was struck down by an energy blast. Thaxis looked at the terrified boy with interest. Danny was small for his age, with sandy brown hair and freckles across his nose. He still clutched his book about knights and dragons. "A human child," the general said. "Perfect." Danny looked around desperately for help. He saw his mother's face, twisted with fear and rage. He saw his neighbors, people who had taught him to read and swim and ride the hoppers. He saw his father, lying motionless on the ground. "Please," Danny whispered. "I want to go home." Thaxis smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "There is no home for your species in our galaxy, young human. But you will serve a purpose. You will be our message to the rest of your kind." The general raised his weapon. Hidden cameras, planted by Kreth intelligence to record the conquest, captured every moment. In a few hours, the footage would reach every human world in the galaxy. Danny's. Last thought was about the story he had been reading that morning. In the book, the knight always arrived in time to save the innocent. He closed his eyes and waited for rescue, but no knight came. The sound of the energy weapon echoed across the square. Maria Parker's scream could be heard for miles. And somewhere, in the wheat fields of Millfield Colony, something fundamental changed in the universe. The Kreth had finally pushed too far. They had killed hope itself in the form, an 8-year-old boy with freckles and a book about heroes. They thought they were sending a message of fear. Instead, they had just awakened something that had been sleeping in the human soul for generations, something that would make them regret the day they had ever heard the word human. The footage of Danny Parker's execution began transmitting to Earth within the hour, and across human space, mothers and fathers looked at their own children and felt something new burning in their hearts. It wasn't fear anymore. It was rage. The footage reached Earth 18 hours after Danny Parker died. Admiral Kate Sullivan was in a meeting with the Colonial Defense Council when her aide burst through the doors without permission. The young officer's face was pale, and his hands shook as he handed her the datapad. "Admiral, you need to see this immediately," he said. Kate had been a soldier for 30 years. She had seen battle footage, casualty reports, and refugee testimonies. Nothing had ever prepared her for what she watched on that small screen. An 8-year-old boy, alone and terrified, begging for his life. And then the flash of the energy weapon. The room fell silent. General Robert Hayes, a man who had never shown emotion in 20 years of service, quietly left the room. Through the walls, they could hear him being sick in the hallway. Colonel Patricia Mills sat staring at the blank screen, tears streaming down her face. "How many people have seen this?" Kate asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Everyone," the aide replied. "The Kreth broadcasts it to every human world. They wanted us to see it." Kate stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak, but her mind was becoming crystal clear. "Send a message to every human colony, every ship, every outpost. Emergency assembly of all defense forces. Full mobilization authority is now in effect." "Admiral, that hasn't been done since the Independence Wars," General Hayes said, returning to the room. "It's being done now," Kate replied. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, factory worker Frank Murphy was eating lunch when the news broke. The footage played on every screen in the cafeteria. 200 workers watched in complete silence. As a child was murdered for the entertainment of alien conquerors, Frank stood up and walked to the center of the room. He was a big man with calloused hands and a voice that could carry across a noisy factory floor. "Everyone stops working," he announced. "Right now. We're going to sign up to fight these things." "Frank, we can't just stop production," his supervisor protested. "We have contracts." Looked at the man with disgust. "Did you see what just happened? They killed a little boy. A baby? And you're worried about contracts?" Within an hour, every factory on New Pittsburgh had shut down. The workers didn't go home. They marched directly to the military recruitment center. The line stretched for blocks. Similar scenes played out on every human world. Dr. Lisa Carter was working late in her laboratory on Mars when the emergency funding authorization came through. She had been studying Kreth technology for years, trying to find weaknesses. Suddenly, she had unlimited resources and a team of the best scientists in human space. Her assistant, Dr. Kevin Wright, burst into the lab with a datapad full of new project approvals. "Lisa, look at this. They're giving us everything. Weapons, research, ship design, new materials. They want results in months, not years." Lisa looked at the authorization codes. These were resources that had been tied up in bureaucracy for decades. Someone very high up had cut through all the red tape. "What changed?" Kevin asked. Lisa showed him the footage of Danny Parker. AIM watched it once, then threw the datapad across the room. "How fast can we work?" he asked. "Fast enough," Lisa replied, on the farming world of New Eden. 16-year-old Scott Davis had been planning to study agriculture like his father. The morning after Danny's death, he walked into the local recruitment office instead. "I want to join the military," he told the recruiter. "Son, you're too young. Come back when you're 18. Scott pulled out his datapad and showed the footage. "That could have been my little sister." Not waiting 2 years. The recruiter looked at the boy's determined face. All over human space, children were trying to enlist early. Parents who had once protected their kids from violence were now encouraging them to fight. "I'll see what I can do," the recruiter said. Admiral Jake Morrison, recently promoted after his rescue work at Haven's Rest, found himself in command of the largest fleet assembly in human history. Ships were arriving at the staging area near Jupiter every hour. Merchant vessels, exploration ships, private yachts, anything that could mount weapons was being converted for war. His chief engineer, Commander Amy Foster, brought him the daily reports. "Admiral, we've got problems. Half these ships aren't military grade. The crews are mostly civilians with no combat experience. The weapons systems are improvised, at best." Jake looked out at the growing fleet. "What about their motivation?" "Sir, these people, they want to fight. They're not here because they were ordered. They're here because they choose to be. That counts for something." Amy nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, it does." On Earth, President Helen Torres prepared for the most important speech of her career. The global assembly was packed with representatives from every human world. The mood was unlike anything in recorded history. Torres took the podium and looked out at the faces before her. These were people who had spent their lives building a peaceful civilization among the stars. Today, they were ready to tear it all down for justice. "My fellow humans," she began. "Yesterday, we were farmers, teachers, engineers, and dreamers. Today, we are something else. Today, we are the sword of justice." The applause was thunderous. But Torres raised her hand for silence. "Kreth believe they understand us. They think we are weak because we choose peace. They think we are cowards because we avoid conflict. They are wrong." She paused, letting her words sink in. For 300 years, the galaxy has lived in fear of these creatures. They have murdered millions of innocents. They have enslaved entire worlds. And yesterday they made their greatest mistake. They killed one of our children. The assembly erupted again. Torres waited for quiet. The Kreth wanted to send us a message of fear. Instead, they have awakened something that they do not understand. They have awakened the protective fury of the human species. Today, we declare war not just on the Kreth dominion, but on the very idea that evil can triumph through terror. She looked directly into the cameras that would broadcast her words to every human settlement. To every human watching this, know that we go to war not for conquest, but for justice. We fight not because we love violence, but because we love our children. The Kreth wanted to break our spirit by killing young Danny Parker. Instead, they have given us a reason to fight that. We'll never be defeated. The vote for war was unanimous. Not a single representative voted against military action. The authorization for total war passed within minutes. Across human space, the transformation was immediate and total. Peace-loving colonists became soldiers overnight. Scientists abandoned theoretical research to build weapons. Children too young to fight worked in factories to support the war effort. The phrase "Remember Danny" appeared on walls, ships, and uniforms. It became more than a slogan. It became a promise. In the depths of space, Kreth intelligence officers monitored human communications with growing concern. The reaction was not what they had expected. Instead of surrender, they saw preparation. For war, instead of fear, they saw rage. General Thaxis, the killer of Danny Parker, dismissed the reports. Humans are weak. They will break when we show them real power. But deep in Kreth space, older and wiser voices began to whisper warnings. The humans were changing. The galaxy had seen conquerors before, but never anything like what was awakening in human space. For the first time in 300 years, the Kreth Dominion faced an enemy that was not afraid. They were about to learn why that was a very dangerous thing. The child was dead, but his death had given birth to something new. Something that would not rest until justice was served. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. 6 months after Danny Parker's death, the first human war fleet jumped into Kreth space. Admiral Jake Morrison commanded 300 ships, but these were not the same humans who had once fled from Kreth's attacks. These were people who had spent half a year preparing for this moment. The target was Zarian Prime, a major Kreth military base that controlled 5-star systems. Intelligence reports said it was heavily defended, with orbital weapons platforms and a fleet of 50 Kreth warships. The old human military would have considered it impossible to attack, but these were not the old. Humans Captain Ryan Davis commanded the destroyer Swift Justice. His crew of 30 volunteers had trained day and night for this mission. On his ship carried a photo of Danny Parker in their uniform pocket. The boy's face had become a symbol of everything they were fighting for. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, came the voice over the communication system. Today we begin to take back the galaxy. Today we show the Kreth what happens when they hurt our children. For Danny, 300 ship captains replied at once. The battle began immediately. Kreth's sensors detected the human fleet as soon as they entered the system. General Vexstar, the Kreth commander, could not believe what his instruments were telling him. No species had ever attacked a major Kreth stronghold. How many ships? He demanded. 300, sir. All human vessels. Vexstar laughed. He destroyed human colonies with half that number. Send 40 ships to meet them. We will crush. This pathetic gesture. But when the Kreth ships engaged the human fleet, something was different. The humans did not retreat when fired upon. They did not try to escape when their shields failed. Instead, they pressed forward with a fury that the Kreth had never encountered. Captain Davis watched his weapon systems overload as he poured fire into a Kreth battleship. His engineering officer, Lieutenant Carol Stone, reported critical damage. To their main engines, Captain, we're losing power. We need to fall back. Davis looked at the photo of Danny Parker taped to his command console. The boy's innocent face seemed to be asking for justice. No retreat, Davis said calmly. All power to forward weapons. Ramming speed, sir. You heard me? Ramming speed. The Swift Justice accelerated directly toward the Kreth battleship. Alien commander tried to turn away, but Davis had anticipated the move. The human destroyer crashed into the Kreth vessel at full speed, destroying both ships in a brilliant explosion. The gap in the Kreth line allowed 20 human ships to break through to the orbital stations. Aliens had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice themselves for victory. On the ground, General Patricia Hayes led the assault on the main military complex. Her soldiers moved through the Kreth base with methodical precision. They'd studied every report from surviving colonies, learned every Kreth tactic, and prepared counter-strategies for each one. Sergeant Mike Johnson's squad encountered a group of Kreth, soldiers holding human prisoners. The aliens expected the humans to negotiate for the hostages' lives. Instead, Johnson's team used flash grenades and smoke to blind the guards, then moved in with close combat weapons. The old rules don't apply anymore, Johnson told his men. As they freed the prisoners, the Kreth want to play with terror? We'll show them what real fear looks like. Dr. Lisa Carter's new weapons worked better than anyone had hoped. Her research team had discovered that Kreth armor was vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. The new human rifles could punch through Kreth's defenses like paper. But the real breakthrough was psychological. Dr. Carter had studied captured Kreth communications and learned something important about their society. The Kreth were bullies. They were used to fighting enemies who were afraid of them. When faced with opponents who showed no fear, their coordination began to break down. They keep requesting reinforcements, reported Intelligence Officer Commander Paul Wright. Their field commanders are describing our tactics as impossible and unnatural. Admiral Morrison smiled grimly. Good, let them be confused. The battle for Zarian Prime lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Kreth base was in human hands. More importantly, the myth of Kreth invincibility was broken. Word spread quickly through the galaxy that humans had defeated a major Kreth stronghold. The Kreth prisoners were a revelation. Without their weapons and armor, they seemed smaller somehow. Fear made them appear almost pathetic. These were the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries, Captain. Jennifer Lopez interrogated the base commander, a Kreth general named Kethron. Your empire is finished, she told him. We're going to free every world you've conquered, Kethron hissed in defiance. You cannot defeat the Dominion. We number in the billions. You are just one species among many. Jennifer pulled out her datapad and showed him footage from across human space. Massive fleets were gathering at every human world. Factory ships were producing weapons around the clock. Even human children were contributing to the war effort. You're right, we're just one species, she said. But we're a species that you made a mistake with. You killed our child. Now you get to see what humans are really like when someone hurts our young. The psychological warfare began immediately. Human ships broadcast footage of the victory at Zarian Prime to every Kreth world. They showed Kreth soldiers surrendering, Kreth commanders begging for mercy, and Kreth bases burning. More importantly, they broadcast footage of liberated prisoners. Aliens from dozens of species who had been enslaved by the Kreth were freed and armed. The message was clear. The humans were not just fighting for themselves, but for everyone the Kreth had oppressed. On the mining world of Tethka, the native population had been enslaved for 50 years. They saw footage of human victories. They began their own rebellion. Similar uprisings started on dozens of worlds. The Kreth Empire, built on fear and terror, began to crumble as that fear turned around. Now it was the Kreth who were afraid. General Thaxus, the killer of Danny Parker, watched the reports from his command ship with growing concern. The humans were not behaving like any species the Kreth had ever encountered. They fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but also with the coordination of a professional military. Send word to the Emperor, he ordered. You may need to negotiate with these humans. His aide looked shocked. Sir, the Dominion does not negotiate. The Dominion has never faced anything like this, Thaxus replied. But the humans were not interested in negotiation. Admiral Morrison's response to Kreth diplomatic overtures was simple. You can surrender unconditionally, or you can be destroyed. Those are your only choices. Then 3 months, human fleets had liberated 12 worlds. The Kreth military, used to easy victories against frightened opponents, found themselves constantly retreating. Their commanders began to doubt their training, their equipment, and their cause. On Earth, President Torres received daily reports of human victories. But she also received casualty lists. Thousands of humans were dying in the liberation campaigns. The price of justice was measured in blood. Still, there was no talk of stopping. Every human family had seen the footage of Danny Parker's murder. Every parent understood that this war was about protecting all children everywhere from the evil that had taken one innocent life. The tide of war had turned completely. The Kreth, who had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries, were now the ones being hunted. And they were learning a hard truth about humans when their protective instincts were awakened. Humans became the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The boy's death had changed everything. Now the Kreth would pay the full price for their cruelty. The war was far from over, but everyone in the galaxy knew how it would end. The age of Kreth terror was coming to a close, and a new age of human justice was beginning. 2 years after Danny Parker's death, the largest military force in galactic history gathered at the edge of Kreth home space. Admiral Jake Morrison now commanded 5,000 ships from dozens of species. What had started as human revenge had become a galactic liberation movement. The Zalani traders, who had once cowered in fear of Kreth raiders, now flew alongside human warships. The Thoric miners had contributed their heavy industrial ships, converted into mobile weapons platforms. Even species that had never fought before were represented in the massive fleet. But at the center of it all were the humans. They had become something new in the past 2 years. Not conquerors, but liberators. Not destroyers, but protectors. Every ship in the human fleet still carried photos of Danny Parker, the 8-year-old boy whose death had awakened their sleeping fury, the Kreth. Homeworld of Kethmer was a fortress unlike anything in the galaxy. Massive orbital defense stations surrounded the planet like a steel web. The surface bristled with weapons that could destroy entire fleets, and protecting it all was the remainder of the Kreth Imperial Navy, Nearly 1,000 ships commanded by their greatest generals. Emperor Valdrix watched the approaching fleet from his palace throne room. He was ancient even by Kreth's standards, having ruled for over 2 centuries. He had seen the rise of the Dominion from a single world to a galactic empire. Now, he was watching it die. "How many ships do they have?" he asked his military advisor. 5,000, my emperor. Perhaps more. Our sensors are having difficulty getting accurate counts. Valdrix closed his eyes. In 2 years, the humans had done what no species had managed in 3 centuries. They had united the galaxy against the Kreth. Every world that had been conquered, every species that had been enslaved had joined the human cause, and our own. "Forces 900 ships, my lord? The cream of what remains of our navy?" The emperor stood and walked to his window. Below, he could see the capital city where millions of Kreth civilians waited in fear. For the first time in their history, they were the ones facing conquest. "Send a message to the human admiral," Valdrix ordered. "Tell him I wish to discuss terms." But the humans were no longer interested in talk. Admiral Morrison's response was broadcast to every ship in both fleets. "The time for words ended when you murdered Danny Parker. Today we finish what you started." The final battle began at dawn on Kethmer. The human fleet advanced in perfect formation, their ships bearing the names of every world the Kreth had destroyed. The lead vessel was called the Danny Parker, commanded by Captain Steve Logan, whose own son had died in the Haven's Rest massacre. The Kreth fought with the desperation of a cornered predator. Their ships launched everything they had, filling space with energy beams and missiles. The orbital stations opened fire with weapons that could crack continents. But the humans kept coming. Dr. Lisa Carter, now serving as the fleet's chief scientist, had spent 2 years perfecting anti-Kreth technology. Human ships were equipped with shields that absorbed Kreth energy weapons and turned the power back. Against them, the electromagnetic pulse weapons that had worked so well at Zarian Prime had been improved beyond recognition. Captain Logan's ship took the brunt of the Kreth's defensive fire as it led the assault on the main orbital station. His shields failed, his engines were damaged, and half his crew was dead or wounded. But he pressed on, remembering the promise he had made over his son's grave. "This is for every child they murdered," he said as the Danny Parker rammed through the station's defenses and landed troops directly on the command deck. The battle for the orbital stations lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Kreth homeworld lay defenseless. But the humans did not bombard the cities or massacre the civilians. Instead, they sent landing craft to the capital with a simple message: surrender now or face justice. General Patricia Hayes led the ground forces that entered the Kreth capital. Her soldiers moved with professional precision, securing key points and protecting civilian areas. These were not conquerors seeking revenge, but soldiers delivering justice. They found Emperor Valdrix in his throne room, sitting quietly among his treasures looted from 100 worlds. The ancient Kreth looked up at the human general with something approaching relief. "It is finished, then?" he asked. It is finished," General Hayes confirmed. "By the authority of the Galactic Liberation Council, you are under arrest for crimes against sentient life." The trials began 6 months later on the neutral world of New Geneva. Representatives from every species the Kreth had oppressed gathered to witness justice finally being served. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 centuries of systematic murder, slavery, and terror documented in the Kreth's own records. General Thaxis, the killer of Danny Parker, was the first to be tried. Captain Logan personally escorted him to the defendant's chair. The Kreth general had aged visibly in captivity, his proud bearing replaced by the hunched posture of defeat. "You stand accused of genocide, war crimes, and the murder of innocents," Judge William Harrison announced. "How do you answer these charges?" Thaxis looked around the courtroom at the faces of his victims' families. Maria Parker sat in the front row, holding a photo of her murdered son. Alex Parker, who had recovered from his injuries, sat beside her. "Wait," followed orders. Thaxis said quietly. "That is not a defense for what you did," the judge replied. The sentences were swift and final. Emperor Valdrix and his top generals were executed for their crimes. Lower-ranking Kreth officers were sentenced to labor camps, building memorials to their victims. The Kreth military was disbanded forever. President Helen Torres, now leading. The newly formed Galactic Peace Council announced the establishment of the Danny Parker Protocols. These new laws banned the targeting of civilians in warfare and created rapid response forces to prevent future genocides. Never again, she declared to the assembled representatives. Never again will innocents be murdered while the galaxy stands by in fear. The Kreth homeworld was transformed into a memorial park. Where the Emperor's palace had stood, a simple statue was erected. It showed an 8-year-old boy reading a book under a tree with the inscription, Danny Parker. His death awakened the conscience of the galaxy. Maria and Alex Parker attended the dedication ceremony. They were older now, their hair gray from grief and stress, but they stood proud as representatives from hundreds of worlds paid tribute to their son. He would have liked this, Maria said, looking at the statue. He always believed that good would triumph over evil. Captain Morrison, now Admiral of the Galactic Peace Fleet, placed a wreath at the statue's base. He was right, he said. It just took longer than it should have. In the years that followed, the galaxy healed. The liberated worlds rebuilt their societies. Former slaves became citizens of new democratic governments. Trade resumed between the stars, but now it was protected by the Peace Fleet. Ready to intervene anywhere that innocents were threatened, the Kreth species was not exterminated. The humans had learned from history that genocide only breeds more hatred. Instead, young Kreth were educated about their people's crimes and taught to build a better future. Many of them became some of the galaxy's most dedicated peacekeepers. Driven by shame for their ancestors' actions, Danny Parker had been dead for 3 years when the last Kreth prison camp was liberated. The boy who loved books about knights and dragons had become the inspiration for the greatest rescue mission in galactic history. His death had ended 3 centuries of terror and ushered in a new age of peace. On Millfield Colony, where it all began, a new generation of children played under the old oak tree where Danny had built his fort. They were safe now, protected by fleets that patrolled the stars and laws that guaranteed their rights. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, the older colonists swore they could hear the sound of a child laughing in the rustling leaves, a reminder that innocence lost had become justice won, and that even the smallest light could drive away the darkest night. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson of all. When you hurt humanity's children, you awaken something that will never stop until justice is served.